The sentencer, the redeemed, the penitent sinner. I've been called many things since my death. In my time, I was simply known as Caesarion, the Archon, but this is not my story. As a child, my lady Andraste lived in a small fishing village along the coast of the waking sea. Her mother was one of the most ancient and respected of clans, and her father was a revered Alamari chieftain who worked his entire life to see peace brought to his people. But this peace would not last once we set our sights on Ferelden lands. We burned her village. We took the young and able-bodied and slaughtered the rest. It was our way, to pillage and destroy in the name of our gods. And now Andraste, a captive, was sold into servitude. She was only a child, and it pains me to think what might have befallen her in the hands of her masters. She was raised in Minrathous, a land she'd known as foreign and hostile. Years of captivity had strengthened her resolve to see her people freed and returned to the land of her forefathers. She prayed for deliverance every day, but her prayers died on the wind. She would have to deliver herself, so she escaped and vowed to return to free her people. She made the treacherous journey through the desert sand and snowy mountains until her feet walked along her Ferelden shores once more. When Andraste returned to her village, now mostly hidden in snow, drifts, and ash, everyone that she knew and loved was gone. In the frigid mountains of Ferelden, she wandered once more, seeking refuge. A neighboring tribe welcomed her among them out of pity. Andraste was wise, and with her wits, she rose from eating the scraps of other villagers to marrying the great war chief Mafarath. But not even the love of her children and her war-hound Mabari, or the adoration of her husband, could make her forget her vow to free her people. And so she prayed and sang to the gods every day for a miracle. The god of the mountain and the wind did not answer her, but the Maker did. The Maker was moved by the sincerity of Andraste's song and spoke to her. He showed her all he had built, the world and all its creatures, and the spirit world of the Fade and all its inhabitants. He revealed to her how men had turned away from him and began worshipping false gods, idols, and demons. And so he had turned from man in disgust. But he was so captivated by Andraste's sweet voice that he offered her a place at his side, away from suffering and grief for all of eternity. Andraste could not forget her promise to her people. She begged the Maker to return to the world of men in order to save her people from a life of sin and hardship. Reluctantly, the Maker agreed. So I want to talk a little bit about how I came up with this story. I tried for weeks and I just was not coming up with any ideas. So I went to one of my favorite games and I borrowed a bit of the lore therein. And so the lore that I borrowed was the story of Andraste, who is considered to be the bride of the Maker, who is the god in Dragon Age series, which is a game released by BioWare, and the comics are a part of Dark Horse Comics. So my first slide, I have I won't call him a protagonist, he's kind of the anti-hero in this story, and his name is Hyserion. He's the one that ended up sentencing Andraste to death, but in the end he granted her a little bit of mercy and ended her life quickly before the flames could consume her. So because he is in the Fade, which is sort of a purgatory world for all the spirits, whether good or evil, in the Dragon Age series, the Fade is supposed to be a little bit creepy. It does have a bit of a green glow to it. So what I did was I put him in his same Archon robes, and I created a bit of this green, kind of a puke green color fog to envelop him. And the whole point of the Fade is that you can walk and walk and walk, and things are constantly changing, that you will get lost every time, no matter what direction you're walking in. Nothing is ever the same. So this is Cesarion, and he's our narrator. Unfortunately, I'm not a male, so you'll just have to use a little bit of creative imagination and assume that it was a male talking. But so as he's going on, he's telling the story of Andraste. Um, so our second scene with Andraste is the one where she is a little girl and she's running down the beach um, of her seaside village. And this scene, I wanted it to be very light, warm colors. I wanted her to be 1/3 of the way in on the screen, but I also wanted her to be the divider for the horizon. So she kind of splits up the horizon a little bit. And I tried to make it look as happy as possible because it really was a warm childhood memory for her that she's playing along the beach, running towards her home, her village, and the sun is setting. Now, there's a couple good symbolistic points that are in this, and one is that on the left hand of the screen we have some really characteristic warm colors such as pinks and yellows and a little bit of white in there, but then on the right hand side of the screen we have some dark blues, and it's kind of foreboding a little bit. Also on the right hand of the screen we have water, and water brings ships. And that brings us to our next scene, which is Andraste as a little girl, and she is terrified. She looks up and she is absolutely flummoxed. She doesn't know what's going on, but she's scared. And I do have the reflection of the flames in her eyes. She is a contrast to the background where I have completely taken out all of the background elements and only inserted a little bit of red color so that you can really tell this is a moment of hell. This is a moment of hellfire. It's hot. And so it's sort of a bit of a forewarning for what is to come. And that is in the next scene where her village is burning. The village burning is kind of self-explanatory. There is a bit of a circular shape, almost a reverse letter C, for how the scene is organized, with the breakup at the left hand of the screen being the raider carrying the torch. And so you're looking, he's going from the left to the right, so he's walking to the village so that he can contribute to the raid as well. So that brings us to the next scene, which I have done, which is Andraste as an adult. And she has just escaped Minrathous and she is traveling back home. Now, I couldn't really come up with a good idea to show that she is struggling, but it wasn't such a struggle that was life endangering at the same time. So I wanted to make sure that one, she was alone, two, there was a lot of gray color, that the desert she was walking on was very barren. Now, on the left hand of the screen, I've also put some cloud cover, and that signifies everything behind her is gloomy, and she's walking towards the light on the right hand side, and that is to symbolize hope. At the same time, she's once again a divider between the two horizons of the sky and the land, and that is also a halfway point, so she's breaking the scene up into 4 quadrants. When she returns home, she goes and sees her destroyed village, which she knew was already destroyed, but she kind of wanted and hoped that there would be something left. And so when she gets there, she sees there's not a damn thing left for her there. There's nothing but ash. There's, snow on the ground, and I've put the scene with a lot of contrast. I've also used a lot of different angles in how the wooden spokes are organized, And I've also cast this in a bit of blue, a bluish gray filter, so that it's very gloomy, it's very depressing, it's almost monochrome but not quite. The next scene is one where Andraste is walking on the beach, and it's sort of contemplative in that she's very alone, she's very sad. The sea spells doom because one, the waves are very turbulent. Two, it's at about that halfway point to divide the land from the sea, and once again we know that water brings ships, ships bring war, and war is definitely coming. It's in the cards for her. She doesn't know it yet, but it is a bit of foreshadowing for what is to come. Also, the sky is very stormy. That kind of symbolizes the what is on the horizon for her, and that is a turbulent sort of time in her life. Now that brings us to the next point where she's prayed and she's prayed, and the Maker is showing her, hey, these are all the things that I turned away from. And the one thing that I thought would be really, really symbolic of the Maker's hatred for mankind was devil worship. In this case, it's demon worship, which is big in Dragon Age in that whole series. Um, there's a bit of background story as to why the Maker turned away from mankind. But in this, the devil worshippers or demon worshippers, they are blood mages. And to give you a bit of background knowledge on that, a blood mage is someone who, in the presence of blood, they are able to make themselves more powerful. So in this respect, I created everything with red, and I created red cloaks, and I created red lighting, and then I put a red filter on top of it, and all the monks are gathered in a circle, and so this is ritualistic in nature. Now, moving on from this, I didn't have time to finish the rest of my artwork, but I can tell you how the story ends. And the story ends with Andraste. She is gathering all her people, and she wants to take back the slaves from Menrathis and from Tevinter and all these mage lords that have enslaved her. And so she is very charismatic, and she is able to return home to her husband and convince him to lead the Alamari people in rebellion against the slavers. And so that's what they do. And the Maker blesses them and their crusade, and they go through and they just basically decimate all the slaver locations in Tevinter. But what ends up happening is that Mavarath, her husband, starts to grow resentful of her newfound fame because the people love her more than him, because the Maker chose her as his prophet. And so he decides to scheme against her. And he schemes with the very people they are fighting against. And they arrange to have Andraste captured and to have her loyal war dog put down. Now, when all of her army goes to the gates, she's not there. She's not with them because Mavarath has betrayed her and turned her in to the Tevinter authorities. So the Tevinter authorities, they open up the gates of Menrathis, they invite the army inside. The army doesn't know what's going on, and they see Andraste tied to a stake. She doesn't cry out, she doesn't beg for her life when they light that pyre on fire, and her loyal war dog, he's so loyal to her, and she's such a holy woman that he goes and he lays down on the pyre beside her and he dies. When I read that in the story, I teared up a little bit. But she didn't cry out, not once, not from pain, not from suffering, nothing. But she looked at Hessarion, our narrator, and she begged him with her eyes to end her suffering. And so he thrust his blade into her chest and killed her. So this was a little bit of an act of mercy from him, so that she wouldn't be suffering, she would have a quick death. And so again, at the end of the story, we flip back to Hyserion, and he's talking once again from the Fade about how much he wants to be forgiven. And hopefully, when the Chant of Light, which is Andraste's teachings, when that's sung from all four corners of the globe, Mathera will be forgiven, Hyserion will be forgiven, and mankind will be forgiven. And that is where I left off at the end of my story.